can Sergio Perez challenge Max Verstappen to the 2023 Drivers' Championship? Based on his performance at the weekend at Jeddah, I would say yes, but there's probably a little bit more to it than that. Welcome to the 2023 Jeddah Grand Prix review. First up, the start. And Alonso had a great launch. He was able to take the inside line into turn 1 and get past Sergio Perez. Part of me thinks if Verstappen was alongside him, he would have maybe hung it around the outside of turn 1, but Perez did the smart thing and slotted in behind. On lap 1, though, it was announced that Fernando Alonso was being investigated for an incorrect starting position on the grid, and this was very similar to the Ocon incident in Bahrain. It's actually not to do with being too far forward, but actually being too far to the side. And from the images and the onboard, it's actually hard to argue. The issue here is that, well, it seems there was an awful lot of cars outside of their pit box. At least it looks that way from the images, but no one else was penalised. These images are from F1 journalist Albert Fabriga, who always has the best images from the paddock and the race. I'm sure the FIA have sensors that get triggered, so maybe these cars weren't in breach. They certainly look like it to the naked eye. Something needs to be done about it. Alonso was given a 5-second time penalty for the infringement, but the FIA would be a big talking point later in the race, and we'll get to that in a little while. Regardless of this, Alonso seemed calm, and on lap 4, Perez breezed past him, which Alonso didn't really fight because he knew there was no point. That Red Bull was simply too quick. At this point, Verstappen had made up a few places, and he was up to 13th after the opening laps. Alonso then stayed with Perez for a few laps, but then Perez just pulled away, and he had a comfortable 4 to 5 second lead. There was also a fantastic overtake from Charles Leclerc early on in the race on Pierre Gasly. Gasly was stuck behind Hamilton in a bit of a DRS train, but we got to see the overtake into turn 1 from the helmet cam, and it was really, really good. He made his way nicely through the field, did Leclerc, and he got up to 7th place behind Hamilton. He would then get past Hamilton pretty easily after Hamilton was warned for weaving on the straight trying to break the DRS, and he was weaving quite badly. He deserved a warning, and he was lucky that it was only that. Verstappen would then cruise up behind Hamilton after making up more positions, and on lap 12 he also got past Hamilton. I will mention though that all of the top running cars started on the medium tyre, with Charles Leclerc on the softs, but Hamilton actually started on the hards, which in hindsight was probably not the right call. He did complain early on of a lack of grip. Then on lap 19 a safety car came out right after both Ferrari cars had pitted. The safety car was for Lance Stroll, who had to pull the car over with an issue. He actually parked it in a really smart location, but the steward said that the GPS actually showed the car was still on track, and that's why they put the safety car out. It really wasn't needed, but it did neutralise the race, and it gave Max Verstappen a really good chance at a victory. At this point, Perez was leading Alonso by 4 seconds, but he was actually a pit stop ahead of his teammate Max, who had obviously lost a lot of time having to get past so many cars. When the safety car period was ending and all the cars had done their stops, Max was in 4th place. The only cars ahead of him were Russell, Alonso, and his teammate Perez. I'm thinking Max has got this in the bag. He's come from 15th, he got a little bit lucky with his safety car because he was a pit stop behind Perez. But I'm thinking now on fresh tyres, he's going to blitz this. The only unknown was Hamilton, because Hamilton was now on the medium tyres. He was in 6th place, sandwiched between 2 Ferraris. Speaking of the Ferraris, Charles Leclerc wasn't very happy, because he was told by his race engineer to push between the 2 safety car lines so that he could get out ahead of Hamilton, who was pitting. But he was told too late, and Hamilton actually jumped him during the stop. Alonso also served his 5-second penalty during the pit stops, but there would be a lot of controversy surrounding this, which I will cover in detail at the end of the video. On lap 22, a few laps after the restart, Hamilton powered past Carlos Sainz at turn 1, using the grip of those medium tyres to get up to 5th place, where he would eventually finish the race. He did threaten George Russell ahead briefly, but it wasn't really ever going to happen. Hamilton saying all weekend he wasn't comfortable in the car, and George just seemed more comfortable and had way more pace, even on the slower tyre. Speaking of George, Max got past him on the next lap to push him down to 4th. Even with DRS, it honestly looked like Russell's car wasn't moving. Such was the pace difference between him and that Red Bull. It looked incredible on the cameras. The Red Bull car is a full 10 kilometers an hour faster than other cars down the straight. It's a bullet. Then a few laps later, he got past Alonso, who really didn't fight it. And then Perez was the only car ahead, 5.7 seconds away. We all thought it was inevitable, but it wasn't. Max was reporting big issues with his drive shaft, saying it was making a strange noise. But that didn't stop him putting in quick laps, but Perez matched them, and the gap remained pretty stable. I'm thinking maybe Max has backed off because he's got the issue. But then he went for the fastest lap on the final lap of the race, which shows he did have pace. But ultimately, Perez held him off to win the race. Checo is a real beast at street circuits. Also, both McLarens had to change their front wing very early on in the race. Oscar Piastri had such a good qualifying. He was in the top 10. And then on the first corner, he had a little contact with one of the Alpines on the exit. And he lost his front wing, or at least part of his front wing, and had to pit. Then later, Lando Norris pitted for a new front wing. It turns out he'd run over some debris. Likely the debris caused by his teammate, which then damaged Lando's front wing. You can't make this stuff up. So what happened to Fernando Alonso? Well, on track he finished third, but straight after the race, the stewards claim he didn't serve his penalty properly earlier in the race, and awarded him a further 10-second penalty. It turns out that despite the mechanics not working on the car, the rear jack was touched during the 5 seconds, and this isn't allowed. This is why he was given his 10-second penalty, which pushed him behind George Russell and into 4th, but still ahead of Hamilton. This wasn't confirmed straight away though. Oh no, Alonso took to the podium thinking he had 3rd place, an absurdity in itself, especially considering the incident took place halfway through the race. If there was an issue, it should have been reported way sooner. Not only that, but after the race, Aston Martin appealed the decision and provided no less than 7 incidents involving other teams serving 5-second penalties where the mechanics and or the jacks were touching the car, and those teams were not penalised. The stewards had no choice but to back down, and they reversed the decision, giving the podium back to Alonso. Particularly awkward for Mercedes, who'd already posted pictures of George Russell and the 3rd place trophy on social media. All in all, it's really poor again from the FIA and the stewards, who carry on having incidents like this where we don't know the true result of the race until hours after the race is actually finished. So back to the original question. Can Sergio Perez challenge Max Verstappen to the title this year? I'm kind of ruling out everyone else. I think the only person that can even come close to Max is Perez, because that Red Bull is so incredibly fast. But ultimately, I don't think Perez has what it takes over the course of a season. I think he will have standout performances like we saw this weekend in Jeddah, but ultimately, I think Max has him covered. And there we have it, the Jeddah Grand Prix review. I hope you enjoyed it. If you did, hit that like button, and I'll see you next time.